Hello, everybody, and welcome to the HTML All the Things podcast, episode number 13, UX Considerations. I'm your host, Matt Lawrence, and I'm joined again by my co-host, Mike Coran. What have you been up to this week, Mike?
Hey, Matt. So this week has been a lot of hat stuff, actually. Like, I know you and I worked on the hat website a bit. We had a couple calls. We got a little bit of design work done. I got a little bit of Vue.js stuff done. We're working on some filter stuff now, and I think the site's coming along real good. We're hoping for release soon. Hopefully, you guys can, if you join our social medias, you can kind of follow our process along because we post some stuff on there.
For sure.
But yeah, like that's about it from the hat side. Work is work. Had some work as well. Canadian Thanksgiving was this weekend. That was a fun time. But other than that, that's it. What about you, Matt?
So same thing. We were, like you said, we were working on the hat website together, and I actually shared I think it was a screenshot of the first kind of content block that it was like the first draft. Like, it's very close to being complete because, it is just a content block, but sort of a first draft of what you should expect from maybe like the aesthetic of the site. We also kind of changed some structure around. We had some redundant stuff that was pretty bad for UX, actually, funny enough, for this episode. So we kind of got rid of, actually, I'll just explain the situation. So we kind of had like a traditional nav bar, as you do, with the, these are the different categories, these are the different pages I want. And what ended up happening is we ended up having what we called a filter bar underneath that. And the filter bar was supposed to filter the content that was going to be showing underneath it, sort of like in a blog style with a filter. But what we realized was that the filter bar was literally identical to the pages that were listed in the nav selection. So when we sat down, because it was something that we never caught, we had gone back and forth through the wireframe over and over again, and we had kind of started learning Vue.js, but it was one of those things that seemed so obvious when we found it. I think it was maybe you that spotted it, Mike, where you were like, why are these two things the same?
Yeah.
And I was just like, well, that's actually kind of interesting. Like, why are we loading a different page for this one? And why are we treating this filter differently when the pages themselves are showing the filtered options, I guess is what the way to say that. So we ended up cutting the filter bar, and we just kind of have a non-redundant system because that was useless. So one of those, that's just something to consider for the listeners, is that, something so obvious can slip through the cracks easily. In our case, it was because we were learning a new tool. So we're learning Vue.js. We also kind of just, put it together, and we added the, like I said, traditional navbar. So it's so routine that you don't even really look into it or consider it when you put something that's that, I was going to say obvious, but that repetitive. Everybody these days, for the most part, has a nav bar. So it's something that kind of can definitely slip through the cracks. But I think we'll jump into the introduction for this episode. So this episode is going to be a little bit different. So it's basically going to cover the basic UX ideals that we take into consideration when diving into a project. Most of our UX experience is through the use of software. We've used software throughout our lives, and we've been paying attention to the details of how a program flows and what things kind of interrupt that flow, or what things don't really work or are unclear. What we're going to be doing in this episode, though, is rather than specific segments, we actually kind of pulled some what this person called our rules for UX. So from the Adobe blog, there's a piece from January that's entitled "The 15 Rules Every UX Designer Should Know." So we're going to be linking that in the show notes, of course. Definitely go give that a go. But basically, a synopsis is that the article lists 15 rules, along with a byline, like a very short descriptor of each rule in the article. And then each rule has a rather long kind of description about what's going on and kind of describing what the rule is about. What we'll be doing, though, is we'll be listing through the 15 rules, and we'll be going through the 15 rules with the bylines, but we won't be doing that, heavy description, that heavy descriptor. We'll be skipping that part. And you guys can, of course, go and read that. But what we're going to do is we're going to use the rules and the byline to sort of drive the conversation because it has a very good coverage of the whole thing. So I think we should just dive right into the very first rule here. So rule number 1 is UX is not only UI. And the byline for that one is user interface is a part of user experience. So one of the things that we kind of thought of immediately, like regarding this, and we actually had this happen to us just right now, are glitches part of UX? So what this question or what this rule kind of brings to my mind right away is you need to consider more than just the user interface, obviously, and you need to consider maybe user mindset, and you need to consider more than what meets the eye, if you will. So, for example, if you have a really good design, okay, so if you have a really good design and you have it all planned out so that the user does very minimal actions, everything's really legible, the action buttons are clear, actionable items are clearly actionable, they're obviously clickable, and that type of thing, you do your due diligence. Having a bad or rushed development cycle can produce a glitch, and that is also part of UX. And it's not something that's really considered, at least not when we think. It's not really something that is considered when you do UX in terms of like the actual design of the actual UX. So you need to consider every little piece. You need to really kind of go through and ensure that you fully embody the user experience. And that goes beyond the design, is what I'm basically trying to get at. Is it's more than just what you wrote down on paper. It's more than just like, oh, the user will click this, then they'll click this, then they'll click this, and that'll easily turn this red or whatever it is. It's like, okay, but what happens if the user has a weak connection? What happens if the user experiences a bug in which when they click red, it doesn't go red, it goes green? Is there an alternative solution in the program's options? Is there an alternative in any way? Is there an easy way for support? Because the support team, if you have like a web app and you have a support team, the support team has a UX there too. Is there an easy way for the user to submit either a bug log, or is there an easy way for the support team over the phone, over email, or over chat to easily identify those bugs? So that's kind of what I'm getting at with this first rule is UX is more than just keep your actions down, keep your clicks down, make sure things are labeled. All that is extremely important, and it's literally the structure, and it needs to be done of UX, because otherwise people are going to be confused and they're not going to know how to do it. But keep in mind that there's I'll call them third-party instances and third-party things outside of your design that will affect it and that you need to consider. I'll just give a straight up example. One of our websites, and I've mentioned this before, Free Photos Hamilton, has a pretty terrible UX for the people that are like actually submitting pictures. And since we were the ones submitting pictures, I was like, well, the UX and the UI is fine for the user, and it works fine and it's clear. So, I don't care about my own UX. But the UX was so bad and required so much like pre-work of like formatting photos and stuff like that. And it required so much of that we essentially didn't want to use it. And then Free Photos Hamilton, stopped having pictures submitted to it because it took so long to do that. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is it wasn't within our scope. We wanted the user to have a great UI and UX, but we didn't consider ourselves. So that's one of the things that, that's kind of like the main feel that I personally get from this rule. Did you have any comments on that, Mike?
Yeah, for sure. That was a good example of Free Photos Hamilton, because it was like a very long multi-step process, and it wasn't a glitch or anything. I think it was designed that way, but we were kind of working within the limitations of the WordPress template that we were using.
Right.
So I think that's what hindered us for Free Photos Hamilton. Which is not an excuse, but we were new developers, and we thought that focusing more on the user experience, the people that are actually using the site, and not the content creators, was the right way to go. But eventually, it kind of bit us in the ass. So yeah, I agree with that one. That was a good experience. And the other thing is, just reading this article, a really good little tidbit is that the UX is more about the feel the user actually has with your the experience of the application or the website, so that you want to leave the user feeling good when they're using it. So you want them, when they leave the application, to not have a bad taste in their mouth because something went wrong, or something was too long, or something wasn't clear. You want the user to go to your site, use it the way it's meant to be used, and then leave the site thinking, okay, I can go back to that site again and be satisfied with my experience. I thought that was a pretty good example for this kind of what is UX topic. Just that feel is an important part of the whole experience, and it brings it all together as well.
For sure.
Yeah, exactly. So, but other than that, I think unless you have anything back to add, I'll move on to the next rule.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah. So next rule is know your audience, and it's a pretty big one. We definitely kind of like didn't do this at first, but really went into it heavily after that, because it's really important to know who that audience is. So the little byline here is user research is a natural first step in the design process, and that totally makes sense. So when you're designing any sort of application, whether it be a small business site or like a site for like an industry, a specific industry, you don't know what the users will want unless you do a little bit of research, and that research could be anything from like a form for people to fill out. If you can find like a nice little subreddit that people are willing to interact with you, you can just approach them and be like, listen, I'm building something for your community. Here's a little form, 4 or 5 questions. Can you please fill this out for me? What would you say? Like, those questions could be anything like, how many steps do you think you would do to be able to do this action? Would you be willing to do this instead of this? It could be many things depending on the community. But if you can get a good amount of feedback, even that 100 to 1,000 people giving you feedback, even less sometimes, obviously, because you don't have access to a community like that. Even just a couple people that are really into the thing that you're building, those people can be very crucial in building the experience out of it. Like for instance, we built an industry site for industry professionals. We already had an old website that people were using and people liked for the most part, and it was it was almost anti-UX in my opinion, because it was very content heavy and very text heavy. But it's an industry site for industry professionals that need that content and they don't want to go searching for it. So we kind of followed that design guideline, gave them a very similar experience with a new design twist on it, and I think it really worked out because we didn't get those calls being like, oh my god, your site's gone, like the site's completely different now, I don't know how to use it. People came back to it and knew kind of where everything was, because they were kind of it was an old school industry. And like when you're designing stuff for people that are maybe in the 50, 60 year range, you know that they don't want change. You know that they don't need to, you don't want them to adapt to something completely new, because they're not going to. So that was kind of like know your audience in that situation. That's about it for my examples, I think, for now. Matt, do you have anything to add to that one?
Well, one thing I was going to say, and I'm paraphrasing somebody's testimonial, and it's been a while, so just to add some salt into there. But on that particular project that you were discussing, the industry one, one of the things that did come up was one person said that they were really like, and again I'm paraphrasing, but they were happy that the website had undergone like a facelift, because it made it look like it was still important. So despite the fact that the audience, obviously didn't want change, I think that they still, because we only got, or at least I was only sent positive feedback from a variety of people. And I think that's one of the things is, those people don't want change. They still want, the show button here. They still want the home button here. They still want the buttons where they want. They still want the content the way, but they can still see that it's been, like, you can visually see an upgrade. So like basically what we had done was we made it mobile ready. We made it, full screen, because it was one of those old, like, kind of left aligned sites. We made it have modern colors at least. And we made, like, there was a bit of a brand aspect with it, where the particular company updated their logo and their general design internally. Like, they got new shirts for their employees and that type of thing. So it was sort of like a refresh, but a refresh doesn't need to be a redesign. Some stuff we did, some stuff we hid in menus, like, only 4% of the people using the site or whatever use this menu option. Well, I'm going to hide it in a drop down that they're going to be able to access, and it's very similar to where they accessed it before, so they should be able to figure it out, or at least be walked through it by somebody if they call. But I'm still going to hide it because it's hurting the look, for example. So that's just one of the things that we did. But I think that's important to say is, if the company doesn't want, some crazy full screen, one pager design with a whole bunch of options all over the place, it is the audience that has to basically judge that. It's the audience, it's the people that are using the site that do it. If they want something that's all red, like literally the pure color red, like in terms of hex code, just the double F, like literally then do it. You know what I mean? Like, obviously do have some pushback and have some, this is my professional opinion. What are your things? And if they're like dead set on this, I mean, they are the audience generally, and they know what they want. So just kind of do it, even if it's something that doesn't quite make sense. In this case, it made perfect sense because obviously industry people, they don't want to spend like, they're busy doing, they're busy doing their like regular jobs. Their job is not to work with the website, and they want to be able to find things easily. So that makes perfect sense. So that's just a couple of notes that I wanted to add there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Actually, and you bringing that up actually got me another, I have another example in my head now. We work with a company that does optical retail environments, and what that is that optometrists have shops that sell glasses pretty much. There's optometrists, there's opticians. The opticians are kind of like a step below. They're the ones that are selling and picking out the glasses. The optometrists are the ones doing lenses. So we make applications a lot for the optician to use and for demonstration purposes. So when you're making stuff for people that are kind of very versed in the subject, it's very different than making it for the layman, for the regular user. So we do both. We do making it for the regular person that's just picking out the sunglasses, that doesn't know about the technologies that go in behind the lenses, and the optician. And when we're doing that, we very much change up our design process and the content that we put there and the whole experience, because we know that the user's not going to know what RX means sometimes. Like we know that the user's not going to know what all the focal lengths are, but where the optician knows that, and they use this application as a supplementary thing to describe to the user, so they know what they're doing. We use different terminology, we use a different experience. It's important to, again, know your audience, and that these kinds of examples kind of bring it into perspective, I think. But I think that's that covers the know your audience section, at least for us. So I think we're gonna move on, unless Matt, you have anything else to add?
No, I think that covers that one for sure.
Cool. Let's move on to the you are not the user. And again, I agree pretty heavily with this one as well, because I think we've made this mistake a few times where we kind of designed something for us. We designed this thing called List by Design, and we've talked about it a couple times on the show, where it's kind of like a bookmark manager, but it has a little bit more function to it, where you can add a price, you can reorder them, you can sort them, you can make different lists of bookmarks. So it provides a little more functionality, but we kind of designed it for ourselves, and we kept the user experience very internal when we were first starting it, and without knowing that other people are going to be using it. For some reason, that's how we started doing this. But then once we got a small test group, even I think we only had like 5 people testing it initially, the experience completely changed. So we noticed that they weren't doing the things that we thought they were going to do. Like the byline for this is testing with real users is an essential part of the design process. So like once they do the test, almost everything can change, especially when you're just starting out and you don't know the very typical design process and the very typical user experience that people usually tend to use. You kind of design based on your own, and that's usually not what lines up with the majority of people. So that small test group really gave us a very like eye wide open experience, and I think we approach mostly all of our projects differently now just because of that one experience, because we know that we're not the users. We need to be able to have that small test group to test it, and we now design stuff differently just based on that. So Matt, do you have anything you would add to that, since you kind of work with the test group a lot too?
Definitely. So I'm actually looking at List by Design right now. It's just opening it up, and one of the things, or two of the things that I remember explicitly that we never picked up on and that the users picked up on. Number one was we added so this is like sort of material design. It's inspired by material design in terms of the actual look. And one of the things that we did, well, first of all, this UI that I'm looking at right now is completely different because of the users. And there's a lot of intricacies there. Like they had like a lot of tips. Like, I don't know where the edit button is. I don't know where this is. I don't know where that is. But two of the things that, really stood out in this final sort of UI that were like later tweaked was we had a checkbox. So for example, right here, we have a checkbox, and it's supposed to be like, if you bought something or whatever, you just check it off. Right here, it's a red square. Some people were confused. They don't know what that is. Like they were unsure. So we added, this is a small thing, but it, small things, add up. And when I hover over it, a checkbox appears when you're in the hover effect. like so people were saying like, what happens when I click this red square? Like people weren't clicking it, and that was one of the things that I remember. Another thing, and this was like a major one that I actually use now, is if I could just click into the settings here, I can see that we have an option where it says so basically I'll just break this down. So basically what would happen is you would click the button, you would add a list item. Okay, so you would add a list item, and it would automatically pull your existing tab. So you're at the tab. Let's say you're making an Amazon shopping list. You're on milk or something on Amazon, and you literally click the plus. It will automatically pull in the URL. You can put in your title, the price, and everything, and add it to a list that you want. But then obviously because there's multiple lists and that type of thing, people want to be able to view those lists, and some people don't want to be able to add it. So we added options to when you click add an item, they automatically goes to the list. We never had that before. We just had it so where you would open up the application, it would always try to pull your latest, and you would have to click a button called view list. There's now a toggle switch here that literally says go to view list after adding item. We also added a dark theme. Like all these settings are all because of people. Dark theme, right? Like people want a dark theme because they thought it looked weird when they had dark theme on their Chrome, that it would not appear like in the same color scheme. Like it was very bright and jarring. So we added a dark theme to fit in with more designs. And then we have another one that says always show add new item on boot. So whenever you click that button, it goes to the old way. But now when I booted this up, it goes to view list. You get to choose. When I click the button, does it show me my list or does it show me items? Like what does it do? So if you're adding things in rapid succession, you could switch that toggle on. But then when you're not doing that and you just want to keep checking your list, you can switch that toggle off. And all of that is due to users. And I use all of those functions off and on, like whenever I need them. I haven't used List by Design, like full disclosure, for a little while, but like when I was using it, and we were using it rather heavily, because like Mike said, we designed it for ourselves, all of that stuff was not in there, and we would never have considered it. Same with, I think, multiple lists. So there's 4 or 5 lists or something like that you can have in List by Design, and I don't think we had multiple lists in there. And somebody said, like, what if I have a shopping list, and what if I have a shared one too, where like I need to have a separate like I have a shopping list that I need to pick up, and then there's like a master shopping list that everybody has. Like, what about that? And same with exporting to CSV. We have an export to CSV functionality that was literally just a straight up user request. So it's just something to keep in mind, that for sure users are absolutely critical to the design procedure. I absolutely agree with that, because we like you said, 5-6 people, and it looked like a small app, and it radically changed its look and its functionality, like radically, totally changed it. I'm gonna go on to the next rule, unless you have anything to add there, Mike.
Nope.
So number 4 then is adapt design for short attention spans. So the byline for this one is don't overwhelm users with too much information. So basically we have our own couple like little personal notes here. So short blocks of text because people don't read is an example, as well as keep interactions quick so people don't make people fill out massive forms. So it's weird, because when I first read this one, I thought, well, that's dumb. Like, that was my honest thing. I was like, well, that's dumb. I don't really consider that. Because UX is all about at a very, very high level, is all about making the user experience good. Obviously, if something should be quick, that should just be a given. But thinking about this and thinking about how we've designed sites in the past with shorter text or less things, or people will constantly ask us for less scrolling. Once I mulled through this, I was like, you know what, this does make a lot of sense, because I could put a bunch of information here, or I could put a list. And same with a lot of, when I'm doing research, the best things that I like is to see like a bullet list rather than reading a block of text. And that's probably due to attention span, as far as I know. So this is actually something that, a lot of it gets covered in like the base UX sort of experience, where like people will obviously try to make things quick. Like, they're not going to make you do 80 actions just to like post a blog post, for example, in something like WordPress. It's just going to be a few quick actions, obviously, because that's like a routine task. But in the same breath, it's like they're probably cutting out a lot of stuff that was probably, like, I assume, in their prototypes even. Because they know that people don't want to constantly see the same warnings. They know that people don't want to read the same privacy policy alerts. They don't people aren't going to do it. There's no way. And whether that's due to speed or whether due to attention span or both, this is a really good point. Is it something that I would say that this would be one of my last things that I would consider, because I think a lot of it's covered in the thing, but in the original design process. But I will say that this is something that I will consider and do consider. Just even looking at our website, the digitaldynasty.ca, we have like 3 content blocks in the front, and we had to put, like a heading, an icon, and then a small blurb of text before you click to read the blurb, because people weren't looking at it. Like, people were just like, I don't know what this is, and like they wouldn't even click on it. And from a design perspective, if you're looking at just a UI design perspective, the objective is met. There's a button there, it's hiding a block of text. You click on it, the block of text shows up, and the user can read it. But if you look at the behavior of the user, the user experience, the UX, you're literally seeing it unfold as the user's not doing it because they don't want to read it or they don't want to do it. And that, again, all of these are obviously going to tie into each other, because this is, getting back into the territory of the other rules we followed. But I think it's just something that you need to keep in mind. Like, this seems like an obvious rule, but sometimes it really isn't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with it. I'm very much a proponent of like just the shortest amount to keep people interested and to get the information across. That's the most important thing. For example, about pages, we know the Google Analytics on those, they're not viewed. Pretty much nobody goes to the about page. People still like to put them there because there's a few people that will be interested in your origin story, but the attention span of a regular person is not. They're not going to go to your about page and read everything on there, especially if you write a huge block of text. If you have like a very intricate and interesting about page where you have more like lists, people like lists, or you have more graphic, people like graphics, that's different. But when you have just a big block of text I say this to clients all the time, like, no one's going to read this. We're going to put this there literally for the Google Analytics, so we can pump, so we can get some more text onto your webpage so that Google can view it and get some metadata from it. But like, I completely agree with it. Usually when we've designed all of our web pages, they're fairly simple, they're fairly straightforward. Talking about digitaldynasty.ca, it is a very straightforward one pager almost kind of web page. Even what we're designing right now, a hat, HTML, all the things, very straightforward, just content blocks, right? Very, very intuitive to understand. You go to the page, there's a bunch of content. You can click on the content to view more. That's all that needs to be. It has to be very straightforward, very simple. If it was like a whole experience, let's say, like, oh, you go to the page, there's a landing page. The landing page allows you to choose between all the different filters. You go to the different filter, then those filters, then they have to go back from the filter to the landing page to be able to go into the next thing. Those kinds of convoluted processes will make a person jump off your page. And that's not just about the short attention spans. That's about more of the whole UX process, like Matt was saying. Like, this is something you consider in the whole UX process. But usually, if you're good at it, and I'm not saying we are, I am, you'll avoid using anything that will require the user to have a longer attention span anyway, and this will become less important because you will already have thought about that. But yeah, that's all I really have to add to that. I think you covered it pretty well there. I think we can move on to the next question or the next rule, unless you have anything else to add to that.
No, I think that's good.
Cool. So then the next rule number 5, the UX process isn't set in stone. So this one's a little like pretty self-explanatory. The byline here is adapt your design process for the product you design. So this means that when you're designing something for a small one-page site, for a small business, it's going to be a different process. The whole process of finding out what the UX is than if you're doing for an e-commerce website. Obviously, a person going to a small business will not expect the same kind of user experience when they go to something like eBay. It's kind of inherent. There's not much really to say about it other than that, because it should be known. But pretty much, some people think that you learn UX, it's a one shoe kind of fits all, where it's not that. You have to learn every single time you design something. It could be an e-commerce website, but for a different client, and they have different priorities. That's a different UX experience, a UX process. It could be a small business one, and a one-page small business. How simple can that get? it could have a different UX process across the board between your clients, because some clients will require more text. Some clients want people to be able to, have a one page, no text. Like, how are you going to design a one page site with no text on it other than a logo to make it clear to the user what's going on there? I think we had a situation with that once where the person just did not want any text on their page. They just wanted a big one page, like a big banner that had their product right on it, and they wanted the user to know exactly what they were doing just based on that one thing. So that's a big difference than if we were to be allowed to put text in it and explain, and not explain, but like even label the product at least. So again, don't think that the UX process is going to be the same across all of your projects. But when you do a lot of projects and you get down some processes for smaller things, like, oh, I have a UX process for a nav bar for this specific thing, you can kind of repeat those things. Or I have a UX process for this slider, right? Like you can kind of take it and compartmentalize it, and then you can use that knowledge that but don't try to get try to fit for this weird UX process onto every single project that you do the same thing. Don't go step by step every single time. That's really all I have to say about that. I don't know if Matt, you have anything to add to the UX process?
Well, I think one of the things that you were saying too, or like that was a good example where, very strangely, because we had mentioned that the older generation kind of wants to stay the same, like not always, like that's a blanket statement, but generally speaking, like especially if they're not working in tech, like they just want it to stay the same so that they don't have to learn something new, so they can get whatever job they need done. But one of the things is they have actually adapted generally, and they'll do things like what you were saying with the logo, where like we'll have some older gentleman or whatever come up to us and be like, hey, I'm selling, I don't know, just make something up. I'm selling lawnmowers, and I want to sell these lawnmowers, and I want you just literally have a picture of a lawnmower with my logo on it and like a repair button.
Yep.
And it's like, well, yes and no. Like, so for something like that, for example, like we had just talked down About Us pages, but something like that might want an About Us page to get more text. Something like that might want an About Us page, because About Us pages, we generally find, do appeal more to guys who are playing the local angle. If people are really into the local angle and they're trying to play that market, you need to have things up there where you need to say like, hey, I came from a humble beginning. I'm in my garage fixing lawnmowers or something. So that UX and UI experience is totally flexible. It's definitely not set in stone. It's all of these things compiled together. And I think one of the things that we don't be paranoid, I think is what I'm trying to get at. Like a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll get like into a situation and it doesn't fit into the template that they've learned. So like they'd have learned UX a certain way. They go into the real world, they get an experience, or like they have like a client who needs something and they want like an experience designed on their website that doesn't fit any of the UX they've learned. And people will start to kind of freak out and be like, oh my God, like I don't know what to do. Like I don't know how this UX should work. But it's like you kind of do though. You know what I'm trying to get at? It's like just mold your idea into what like they need. Like make sure it fits all their objectives and all that stuff. But you may have weird stuff. You may have very little text. You may have too much text. You may have whatever. And that being said, budget is also a thing as well. Mm-hmm. So some guys will come up with some guys will maybe like a lot of guys will do their research, and they'll actually like research for a while, and they'll come to you and they're like, even if they're not in a technical field, they'll have a bunch of technical stuff like, oh, I want parallax, I want this, I want that, I want this, I want it for $100. There's no way. So a lot of the time what we'll do is we will have a UX that is tailored to a budget where the UX is lesser, but all the objectives are met, if that makes sense. So what I was mentioning before, I think it was in the previous rule, with the UI like objective, like, all the text is there, everything's readable, the user can order it or whatever, the phone number is there, the logo is there, and the brand is there. But it's a couple more actions to do this. It's, there's one less page, there's one less this, one less that. Sometimes it's like, that you should remove a couple of actions, and you should move the pages, and that you should have more pages or less pages or whatever the experience that you're going for like desires, but sometimes the budget just isn't there. And sometimes you just need to be like, okay, if we need to cut this down, like there's a reason why there's budgets, right? If it's like, okay, this is a lower budget, this website is going to look different because we are going to put less work into it because there's less money going into it. So like, don't make it look terrible. Like don't self-sabotage, but don't go crazy and be like, oh, let's add 30 features to this website or this web app, when normally I would charge somebody, let's just ballpark it, let's just say $1,000 for this particular job, and this guy only wants to pay me $100. Well, sorry, but you're going to get a lesser experience out of your app that you're paying $100 for. And that in itself is molding the UX procedure, where you're like, okay, I'll make a sacrifice here. Okay, I'll shape this. I won't follow what the school or whatever that I went to UX school for says. I won't follow what this article says to the T because I only have $100 to work with. So that's just something that's more businessy, but that's something that's going to come up. Mm-hmm. I think I'll move on to the next question, actually, if you want, unless you have something else to add there.
Nope.
So number 6, so this kind of goes in with the other one, or they all do, but this one kind of goes in with the whole molding thing, is number 6, prototype before you build a real product. So the byline here is the design phase for digital products should include a prototyping stage. So a couple of notes that we made ourselves is that we always make at least a wireframe to show the interactions and the pages to clients, so they know at a high level what the experience will be. And then, for a larger client or somebody that requests it, we'll generally do like a click-through mock-up that can be made before development comes in, so that they can see like, what it looks like with some, stock photos, or maybe some of the photos they provided us and maybe their logo and their color scheme and that type of thing. That's one of the things that ties into the other one. Like I was saying with budget, is typically speaking, when the budget is lower, we won't do a mock-up. So we will still do a prototype, right? So it's still important that you kind of follow this rule and you still have a prototype of some kind, but we'll just do a wireframe. I'm not willing to do a wireframe and a full visual design if someone's giving me $200. It's like, if they're paying me $200, they need to understand that they're going to get something that's a little more standardized, a little more general. Like we'll call it like a little more basic, I guess you could say. Like it's sort of like, we're going to make you a run-of-the-mill site. Maybe you'll have a slider, maybe you'll have a few posts here, you'll have an About Us page, a contact page, and maybe a services page, and there's your run-of-the-mill. But I'm not going to go out and design something totally crazy for you. I'm not going to go and get an artist or an illustrator to illustrate you more things, like a whole bunch of assets. Like we're going to be using more generic assets, and I'm not going to be making you a full click-through prototype. Like I'll absolutely do that, but like that type of stuff will cost more. But one of the things that is key here is that even when you have those clients that do pay less or have a smaller budget, that you really do still need to prototype. So that kind of speaks to the importance of prototyping, whether you do the mock-up or whether you do the wireframe, because what you're going to end up finding out is you're going to find like stupid little things, or even ways to cut things out that you don't need to do, and maybe you'll actually end up saving some money for your client. Like maybe if the budget is rather large, you could actually cut things out, because when you see it visually, or maybe if you're just like writing it out on paper, if you're writing out a sitemap, or if you're making a flow chart for like a web app or something like that for the workflow of like where the user is going to go and what screens he's going to see, you'll find issues in there, and you'll be able to cut those out, and you'll be able to cut those out well before you start actually programming, well before you actually start developing the actual web app or website. So prototyping is very key. It helps with the budget. It helps with kind of dealing with the users at this stage. It's kind of a critical stage where people like to get involved, and then they sort of clients will sort of disappear while you do the development until you have something to show them. So this is sort of like a key point in the procedure in which you want to make sure that they're happy with at least this idea, because they might have a totally different design direction that they couldn't convey to you until they saw yours and started tweaking it. So this is something that you absolutely need to do. Our very first sites, we didn't do this, and we were getting people like, hey, like, can we have a mock-up of this? And we'd be like, oh, like, we're just gonna do a basic site. Look at these sites as an example. But sometimes it did work, and it did work for a decent amount of sites. But in general, that's not really what you should be doing. You should be doing like a full kind of show and tell within the constraints of the budget, of course, but still doing like a full show and tell. Did you have any comments on this one, Mike?
Yeah, for sure. So For the larger click-throughs, I have a little bit more experience with them. We work with a designer for one of our clients, and they do like very large, very high fidelity click-throughs for mockups. And we've noticed that we can get a lot of the miscommunications out, and a lot of the just the very like simple groundwork in before we can actually do any development, which is great. I mean, like Matt said, the cost is a big thing. Like to do a full fidelity click-through mockup is a big cost. It's almost as much as doing a website, pretty much. It's like 50-50, maybe a little bit less than that, depending on how complex the process is and how complex your code is. But for the most part, you have to understand that like clients, you do usually want to see a full representation of the site that they're going to be getting, especially if they're paying, upwards of, in that $5,000, $10,000 range. They want to be able to understand that, and they don't want to be able to like be delayed because you kind of agreed on something, even though a wireframe, and then all of a sudden it's a different experience than what they got. And I've noticed that works pretty well. The wireframe does work to a certain degree. I completely agree with that, especially for lower budget websites. I think you 100% need to do it anyway. But that high fidelity click through mockup is definitely a go-to thing that I've noticed for larger and more complex websites, especially. It just saves like a ton of time and a ton of money on development. Like every single time that we've gone through, we go through at least like 4 or 5 iterations of that high fidelity mockup, which is a lot faster than having to go in and redo all the alignments, redo all the design stuff in the CSS, where they can just the designer can easily go into Photoshop and quickly cut and paste a few things here and there. I mean, it's obviously more complicated than that. I wouldn't say I'm like a designer and I don't have any expertise in that, but I definitely see how fast they do it compared to how fast I can do the same changes in a more development life cycle. And it just makes sense to me. It's speed wise. But yeah, other than that, I think you covered it pretty well, Matt. Prototyping, big part of it. Again, it's that test group thing too. So maybe don't only show your client the prototype. Maybe have a few like close friends and show them a prototype and be like, how would you use this? And see, you can weed out some stuff there. So getting a couple people's opinions is always important, not just one, because your client, let's say you have a client that's very stubborn and you have to show him that you have to change his mind, because sometimes clients can be very stubborn and they think something is right, and they're not the professional here. You're the professional. You have to be the one that goes in and convinces your client to do something when it's going to benefit them. Obviously, you bend sometimes because they're the ones paying you the money, and if they're really, really adamant about something, you're going to have to meet them halfway or something like that. But a lot of the time, make sure to give some pushback. Make sure to get the client everything he can get out of the money he's giving you. Don't make him waste money because he doesn't know better, because that can happen a lot too. So bringing up that you've shown this to other, like a close person, like a close professional that knows this stuff, and he's kind of corroborated your thing, and then telling him, listen, show your close friends, show your spouse, whatever, and ask them about these opinions and see what they say. Sometimes that can work too. So definitely important. Prototypes are important. But other than that, I think we can move on to the next rule.
For sure. Yeah,
let's do it. So rule number 7, use real content when designing. So, and the thing here is avoid lorem ipsum and dummy placeholders. So this has been kind of a big thing with us as well. We initially started just like probably everyone else, and with doing a lot of lorem ipsum and doing a lot of dummy placeholders, whether it be, a block that has the resolution of the item in it, or being just, very filler images or content in there that doesn't have anything to do with the actual site's content that you're designing. So what we found is that people don't understand it. Maybe a professional, if you're working with a professional in the industry, they'll understand what you're doing and that you're just like, placing content there as a placeholder. But usually what people will be like is like, why is that picture there? What is this gibberish that's on my page? Like, this should be real text. And even though you've explained to them beforehand that we're going to put a lot of placeholder stuff there, they don't understand what that means. I don't know what they think it means, but it never lines up to what happens. So you'll get this weird feedback where they'll like your design, but they'll criticize you because you're using the wrong content. And I find it a weird like conflict between the client and us. And we try to avoid it. I think like most of the time when we do these designs, we'll go and find some Unsplash images or some other stock site images that actually have relevance to the product. And sometimes they'll push back on that, and we can say, listen, this is something we found right off the bat, and you can obviously change it, but at least they have like a little bit of a more coherent placeholder and a coherent image of what their site's going to look like. As for the lorem ipsum, that's a little bit more difficult because you need to write content then, and if you're not writing content, you need to ask them to write content, which is a whole other issue. Like we've had to wait months sometimes for people to write a couple paragraphs, and it's almost impossible. So what we end up doing now is we go to their competitor sites, and we can kind of pick and choose some of their text for placeholder, and we tell them that up front, like we're going to competitor sites, we're going to pick and choose some text from there, and we'll use it as a placeholder. You're going to have to write your own, or we're going to have to like combine a few and make it your own kind of thing. Like you have to be upfront, but at least they have some text there that is more relevant to their content, rather than a bunch of gibberish that's like, lorem ipsum Latin stuff. So that's pretty much where I stand on the whole using real content now. I believe like when you're doing something really quick for like a small website, like Matt is saying with the lower budget, sometimes you can't afford to go in and look for Unsplash images, look for images that fit perfectly with the content, and you're going to have to use those placeholder images that I was talking about. And the client's going to have to understand that if they're paying that, like, the $200 to $500 range, we can't provide them the service that they think that, like, the $5,000 websites get. It's unfortunate, but sometimes you have to kind of like, if you have that friction and they don't understand that, you have to kind of sever that relationship with the client, and that happens rarely. But if it does happen, it's not the end of the world, because you're not losing that much, even though you always want to say yes to all the opportunities you get, especially when you're starting out. Sometimes those opportunities can come back to bite you because you're spending, way more time on this $500 website than you should be on this $2,000 website that you just got. So anyway, balance your time. Always get that. That's kind of not really super relevant to rule number 7 with the use real content, but either way, it's relevant to the whole process. So yeah, other than that, Matt, do you have any other topics you want to discuss on this one?
For sure. So this one I'm actually conflicted on. And this is like, for select people, but what I find a lot is when tech enters, common sense exits, if that makes sense. So one of the things that I find with miscellaneous people, and like sometimes it's just sometimes it's just like a lapse in judgment, or sometimes like they're just totally clueless. But for some reason, when people who aren't great at tech sometimes will approach, they don't decide to use a little bit of common sense, and like to me, I agree with the points that you've made about like the lorem ipsum and the dummy stuff like that. But I often will still use them. Now, I do a lot of the small business stuff, so like, part of it's a budget constraint. But one of the things that I always say is that this is a confusion point. This is a point in the process that is going to generate confusion. And I am less willing to invest in time to prevent confusion when confusion is going to happen anyway. So if there's a way to surefire get rid of confusion, obviously that'd be great. But if people are going to get confused whether I use a stock photo or a placeholder, and when we say placeholder, I mean like, if it's a 300 by 200 image, it's really gray with the text 300 by 200, centered in white or whatever. I will still use the placeholder, because to me, it's like I went out and I spent time getting a stock photo and they're confused. It's like that to me should be common sense. And I think that like that's just how like that's like a point of contention, I think, with people in customer service. To me, I'm just like, this is going to be something confusing to them. I'm absolutely willing to explain it to them, but I'm absolutely in some cases not willing to change because they're going to be confused. Like, they're confused if you put lorem ipsum. They're confused if you take temporary text from somebody else. They're confused if you write content because it's wrong, because you're not in their industry. They're confused if you put a picture of a tree when they wanted a picture of a red tree. They're confused, like they're just confused. And I don't know why they're confused, because it should be obvious. It should be like, oh, a picture that's 300 by 200 is going to go here. Lorem ipsum, oh, they're using this. This is gibberish. This is where my text will go. And I don't know why they fight us on it. And to me, that's like kind of anti-common sense. And like, if you're one of those people that are confused by it, like, I'm not making fun of you or anything like that. I'm not saying anything because whatever, I don't know what it is, but a lot of people, if they're not technical, and tech, like I said, when tech enters, common sense leaves. It'll be like using a physical calculator that can do all these amazing things. Using a calculator that has the same layout on a screen, they don't know what the hell they're doing. They're like, I don't know how to press the number 9. It's like, what are you talking about? Click the number 9. It's to that degree. So this is one point that I agree with your points, where like there are ways to sometimes prevent confusion, and there's ways like putting real pictures in, putting text in, putting that in is okay. But even if we get them to write it, which you said could be a month-long procedure to write 2 paragraphs, even if we get them to write it, they might want to change the paragraph. And if we put the old version of the paragraph in there as a placeholder, they might get confused again. Mm-hmm. So I'm literally, my philosophy with this is literally like, do it right, whatever, if there's a way to prevent confusion with a particular client as you work with them, if you know that they're going to get confused on something, maybe stop that particular thing. But the instant that I dive in, I just go, okay, this is probably going to be a massive conversation. Here's my design. Go check it out. And I know that we're going to have a conversation about the lorem ipsum. We're going to have a conversation with the placeholders or the stock photos or the layout, whatever. But I know it's going to be a point of contention. So I just accept it. I systematically accept it more or less, because there is not one size fits all when preventing confusion in this way. Yep. And this goes for IT and everything. It's like, this is gonna, like, people will be like, oh, maybe if I do this, they'll be less confused. It's like, yes, but you just invested an extra hour in trying to prevent confusion, which may still happen, which will result in an additional hour of you explaining it. So why don't you just dive in and explain it for 1 hour, instead of trying to prevent confusion for 1 hour, and you're gambling that additional hour of confusion won't happen. That's just, I don't know, that's just how I see it. I'm just like, okay, this is going to be confusing, and push. Mm-hmm. And like, whether that's right or wrong, I think that's just maybe like an ideological thing in design or whatever. That's just my opinion. Obviously, if a client does not understand lorem ipsum, but they understand dummy text, like just you writing something, and they're fine with that, even if it's wrong, then of course do that. Of course, then you understand this client doesn't like placeholder images, but they like stock photos, even if they're wrong. Okay. So then use that, obviously. But especially when dealing with a new client, obviously budget constraints and that type of thing, I'll just dive into the confusion, because I'm like, these guys are going to be confused. Let's get going. Let's get her going then. And I don't know if you have like a rebuttal against that, but that's just my opinion on that.
No, that's your opinion. I don't have any rebuttal. You can.
So I think it would be good to move on to number 8 then.
Yep.
So number 8, keep things simple and consistent. So the byline for this one is, the hallmark of a great user interface is simplicity and consistency. So we have an example here. So we find it confusing when a one-page scroll website has a navigation, and then it opens up another page, but it doesn't combine the two. So this is sort of, I guess it'd be sort of a hybrid between the new, I'll call it new age design, of having one page in which, it's like one very long scrolling page, and there's like technically pages like in blocks underneath. So it's like the home page, and then you scroll down, then it's the About Us page, and you scroll down, and it's the Services page, and you scroll down, and it's the Contact Us. But it's all in one big like stack, if you will. Whereas like this is kind of like the hybrid, where it's like they have 6 or 7 pages, let's say, in the scroll, and then you click on one in the nav bar and it takes you to a totally separate page. Sometimes it's a redundant page, and it's only that page, like it'll only be services, even though it's one. So like, I agree with that. Like that's rather confusing. Like, always keep things consistent. Things like that, things like that in terms of design, like, hybrid designs generally aren't great. Sometimes it happens due to budget constraints. Sometimes it happens due to retrofitting an old site. So like, it's going to happen in the industry, but like maybe try to avoid it for this reason. Another thing another thing to keep in mind is a lot of icons happen now. So a lot of iconography, I guess, happens in the workplace now. So it's like you have like your work area. So let's say you have like a word processor open, and at the top, back in the day, there were a few icons, but there's a lot of text. Now it's like mostly text. Or sorry, now it's not mostly text. Now it's mostly symbols. a lot of symbols, a lot of icons. So keeping your icons like the consistent is very crucial. You don't want to have like a little person icon and then like a little 2-person icon and you switch what they do. Like one opens contacts and one opens group chat, and you don't want to like flip what they do. So keep consistent across your designs, and preferably, if possible, keep consistent across all of your apps and all of your websites, especially if you're the one that own them. Make sure that you try to keep it, relatively consistent, because otherwise you yourself are going to get confused, especially when you're going back to troubleshoot or add something to a project. You might be like, whoa, why is this opening up different things? And it's just going to cause you more time. It's probably going to cost you a little bit of time in terms of support calls if people are confused. So consistency is absolutely key. I think that one's rather straightforward. I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, Mike.
Yeah, I'll just do a quick example of the Google apps. Like all of the Google apps have a very consistent layout and very consistent navigation. I think that kind of bodes well for them. Like when I use Sheets or when I use Docs, everything is very much in the same location, and I can very easily switch between the two. I mean, Microsoft's the same way, right? It's just like I think it's a more consistent experience now on Google than it is Microsoft even. And we'll actually talk about that a little bit more in the web news,
right?
With the new web news topic. But yeah, I think that's just like a good example that I thought of. But other than that, I think we can just move on to the next rule here. So rule number 9: recognition over recall. So this one's a little more in depth here, but I think it goes to that consistency topic as well. So the byline here is showing users elements that they can recognize improves their usability versus needing to recall items from scratch. So, and this is again what Matt was mentioning with those little icons at the top of a word processor. Everyone knows what they mean now, like the little arrow to go back for undo, little printer, stuff like that. The big B, for bolding, italicized I. So people understand that is how a word processor works. So if you build a word processor from scratch, put those icons in it. You don't have to explain that B is bold. You don't have to explain that I is italic. People already know how it is. And it's the same thing with web design. So when you're designing a website, people know what a button is. People generally know that if there's a button and it has something like go to content or, something actionable on it, they'll click it. It's a very simple, very intuitive gesture. Don't try to redesign the wheel when you're making a button. Don't try to go outside the box too much when you're trying to keep your user experience consistent so that people understand it right away. You don't want to have a whole help guideline for a simple site. You want to keep with the consistent layouts. Yes, there's some pretty cool unique layouts out there that have very interesting but usually intuitive designs. Even if they're really interesting, these very, very smart people that do these very interesting and awesome and unique experiences, they'll use very recallable and recognizable design elements, even when you don't even notice it. And that's the true element of real good design, is when you don't notice the design in the background. You don't notice the person that designed all the user experience for you in the background, because they did. When you're using a website as simple as it is, or as complicated as it is, someone in the background of that site, someone that made that site, thought through almost all the steps. Sometimes not, obviously missed some steps, and you'll know those. You'll immediately be able to pick out the ones that he missed, but the ones that he didn't, you won't even pay attention to, because that is good design. So using recognition, using those recognizable elements, don't try to reinvent the wheel. Like I said, use them, know those recognizable elements just by using the applications around the web. You know that scrolling gets you to the bottom of the page. Don't try to make it so that when people scroll, they go up. Don't try to make it when the people scroll, they go left to right. I don't like those kinds of things. That's a preference in my opinion. For me, I like it when things are more consistent. I don't like it when someone takes over my scroll bar, and then all of a sudden, I don't know if I'm scrolling up, I don't know if I'm scrolling left, I don't know if I'm scrolling right, I don't know how fast, they change the speed at which I'm scrolling. That's just my kind of pet peeve with bad UX in my opinion. But those are the kinds of things that I would try to avoid. Keep people used to your design, add some unique elements maybe, but don't reinvent the wheel. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say for that one. I don't know if Matt, you have anything to add?
I think that's another really straightforward one.
Yeah.
Myself. So I think you really covered that one really well, because I it just makes sense. And I'll literally give you an example right now. We might talk about this in web news. In this Skype call, there is a heart icon that is beating. What is that? I don't recognize that.
I like how if I hover over it, it doesn't show me anything.
It doesn't show me anything.
I'm going to press it. Oh, it's an emoji to the Skype call. I'm going to press an emoji. I'm going to send you an emoji in a Skype call. Oh, yeah, look at that. Top right corner.
How is that? How is a heart an emoji? Put the smiley face. Recognition over recall, folks. Recognition over recall.
I put a little crying, laughing emoji now. And it's not like... Let me clarify what's happening now. This is the new Skype. I'm sure that some people have already used it. We're not talking about putting emojis in the chat. We're talking about an emoji popping up all of a sudden in the top right corner where the user's like avatar is, and hovering over that for maybe a couple seconds.
I see it in the center because you here. So like where there's normally like talking heads, like instead of a webcam, we just have icons because we're just talking via voice chat. So Mike's icon, his chat is like account icons in the center of the screen, and it'll like change with a little emoji hovering over it for a moment. Yeah, that's what the heart icon does.
Yeah, Matt just sent me a heart. So that
like, come on, guys,
is not intuitive. I think they're trying to add a new feature for people without explaining it, which isn't a great idea. But I mean, it worked now in a sense that it created conversation. I guess I don't know if that's what they were going for.
We just explained it to everybody now too.
Yeah, now everyone knows. So that's it. Like, so strange recognition over recall definitely for this one. Good call out.
That's because I remember when I joined the call, it was like, there's something weird about this call, and when you started talking about this rule, I'm like, oh yeah, I don't recognize this. Anyway, number 10, make designs usable and accessible. So the byline for this one is design for a diverse set of users that will interact with your products. And our note here is keep in mind that some users are colorblind or even blind, so make sure to follow the accessibility guidelines. This is something that I actually have the least amount of experience with. I do know that I write a lot of stuff in like regular text, and there's like a couple of things that I did on a few sites where it allows like sort of like those screen readers to read through the site. But I myself haven't really, again, this is sort of like a UI thing. I more or less did the UI part and a little tiny bit of the UX by like sort of making sure that text was formatted correctly and stuff like that. But I never dove into it, and I certainly never experienced it myself. So this is something that I've never gotten users to test. I've never tested, color blindness is one thing. Like, I think that's more systematic as far as I understand it, where you could have colors that are more neutral to the various types of color blindness. And like, that's just like a one and done. It's like you read, oh, don't use this shade of green. Then you don't use that shade of green, for example. But it's like other things like straight up blindness and screen readers. I have never used. So that's a good question. Is I don't really know how we would, like, I don't have any rebuttal for this because I've never done it. And that's actually an interesting point. Maybe that's something that I could try for maybe some hat content or maybe a future episode. I don't know whether you have any experience with this, Mike, but I do not.
I don't really have too much experience. I know that there's a very comprehensive accessibility guideline for, I think for the government of Canada and for the government of the US. Like, they have their own guidelines for accessibility for screen readers and for color blindness and stuff like that. I'm pretty sure you don't use green text with a blue background or blue text with a green background. Those kinds of things are pretty straightforward. But you're right. I also don't have too much experience with this, but this is something that we can definitely look into, and maybe on our next site, make sure that we make it fully screen readable and accessible, for people. It should be, it's an important thing because there's a lot of people that do use the web that aren't fully, they can't see or they can't hear, or, they have issues with navigation and stuff like that. So we can definitely start look into that more, or maybe we should make that a priority for the next site we build. That'd be interesting. Like, even I don't even know how you would test it. Maybe shut off the screen, have the speakers up, and have a screen reader take you through it, and maybe I'm not even sure. Like, use the keyboard to navigate. So that'd be something that we'll write a piece on or something in the future, because that's certainly something that is important, to be clear, and we probably should know more about it. Yeah. I think we can move on from that, though, because we can't really comment on that. Let's
So
do it.
number 11, don't try to solve a problem yourself. So the byline for this one is design is a team sport. Don't work in isolation. So this obviously talks to the fact that you should have people that are testing it. You yourself are not the user. Mike and I will toss ideas back and forth between each other. A prime example is on the HTML All the Things website. We caught that filter bar because Mike spotted like, hey, why is this redundant? And I was so caught up in my own little isolation after doing the wireframe and then immediately going into, start learning Vue, that I just was blindly following my own wireframe. And, again, in a little bit like of an isolation bubble there. So Mike kind of like comes in and goes, hey, why the heck is this here? Simple fix, simple thing. Obviously would have been caught at some point, but it probably should have been caught earlier. And that'll happen. So for sure. So just make sure you don't work in isolation. I don't know if you have anything else to talk about that, Mike. These are getting more to the point, which is good.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's a little bit self-explanatory, but it's a very good thing to know. Like working in isolation almost always gives you like a very skewed view on your project. Like I don't know how many times we've had it where like we think we have such a good idea and we kind of work through it a little bit on our own, and then we go and we present it to like, I present it to you or you present it to me, and we like, immediately you have one question that completely destroys my idea, or immediately I have a question that completely destroys your idea. So working on something in complete isolation will always give you that like weird skewed, very positive outlook on your idea, and bouncing it off someone will not only prevent you from going too far into something that isn't, viable, but it will also improve your idea because you'll immediately get that feedback and immediately be able to adapt to that feedback. And sometimes it's a positive feedback right away, but it's not something positive that you thought. And you're like, oh, wow, maybe I should, focus more on that positive than this positive. And it's not necessarily a negative thing or a positive thing. It's just like you need a feedback loop of some kind to be able to progress your application, because you yourself are not the epitome of knowledge. None of us are. And so having a good community around yourself, even we're lucky to have two people in our company. Usually a lot of web developers start out as a solo freelancer. We started out right away. There's two of us, so we could always bounce ideas back and forth. So I think that really improved the quality and the UX of our products because of that. But once we started testing with a larger group, that also helped too. So I think that's about it for that one, though, unless you have something else to add yet.
No, I think that one's covered good.
Yeah. Let's go to number 12. And this one, again, is another, I think, more self-explanatory one. It's don't try to solve everything at once. So design is an iterative process. So think about a design as being not just one block of, big design. No, it's many different blocks and that you have to go through. So you have to make sure that you've done your research, like you've known your audience. You kind of went through these rules. Like that's the whole point of these rules, right? So if you know all these rules, if you can go through the design process instead of just thinking design as one big thing, then you're going to have an easier time doing it. So if you think, then make, then check, think, then make, then check, and you constantly go back to the first part. So you constantly, do your planning, then maybe make something out of that planning, then check it with someone or check it with yourself or give it to a team. They can see it, and then go back to thinking, go back to redesigning a little bit, and then do it again. So it's like an iterative process in the sense that it's also a cycle. It's not linear, and there's also multiple parts to it. So just when you're designing something, make sure that you're not thinking of design as one big part. You finish it and you're done. No, you constantly have to go back. Even when you're finished designing, right? You go on to development. You start development, and the developer will go through and he'll see something in your design that's either not feasible, or for the money that's being offered, it's not going to be affordable. So he goes back to you and says, listen, I can't do this UX experience for you for this amount of money. I either need more money or I need you to redesign that UX experience just a little bit to make it a little bit simpler for me. Maybe like it could be, just moving something to the same page, or having something that instead of, flies in from the right, just pops up or something like that. Do something different so that I don't have to spend, 10 hours on this, I can spend 1 hour. So you go back, you start thinking about it, and you make something new and you check. I see this happen all the time with my design process. I'm the developer in this case, and we're working with the designer. They'll make something. It'll be really cool and interesting, but then all of a sudden, like, it comes into like, how much money are we going to pay for this? And then when I go and look through my kind of quote that I give them, I'm like, well, I can do this, this, and this, but this, what you designed is great, but I'm gonna need a little bit more money on that. If you can't budget it, that's fine. I'll do it, no problem. That'll be like 10 hours. But if you can, here's an example of something that I could do instead. Maybe you can design a little bit better than what I'm saying. So it's a constant process. Design doesn't end, I would say, with the end of your like of this, with the start of development. It continues on even after. Which is pretty cool too, because you're constantly working together, and again, it's that don't try to solve the problem yourself kind of thing as well. Bring in a designer. Sometimes as a developer, you don't want to you don't know design that well, so if you get stuck on a certain part, if you bring in a designer, they'll look at it with a completely different mindset, and they'll be able to help you with placing something, or maybe with like the actual user experience part of it, with like which steps to include. It's a very important rule. I don't really have much else to add on it, though. That's about it. Matt, do you have anything?
No, I was just gonna say that one of the things that you could really see in real life is literally that smartphones come out every year because it's the same thing, but it's redesigned or designed. It's more refined. So there's always a Gen 1 that feels kind of like it has compromises, because it does, and then literally like you slowly work at it. And there's lots of people that work in different teams. Like, to bring it back to web development, there's so many people. Like you said, you work with a designer, and there's like other people. There's administration. There's like whoever else you're working with. There's a lot of people you're working with, and as a result, you will have this experience where you do it. Maybe you like even pump it out. It's in production version 1, but that's just it. It's version 1. Now we got next version 2 coming up, where it's the same thing, but we need to like add this feature or change this menu or whatever. So it like don't panic if you're like, fuck, this isn't the best thing I could have done. It's like, no, hang on a minute here. Like, best thing you could have done in this instance, if you keep working on it, you could work on it forever. So there has to be a point in which you release it, and then you do another iteration of it at some point. I think I'll move on to the next question here, the next rule here, which is number 13. Preventing errors is better than fixing them. So the byline for this is, wherever possible, design products to keep potential errors to a minimum. So of course, this is again more of a straight to the point one, but it's important to say, make sure that you keep your errors to a minimum. Obviously, having problems, errors, mistakes, glitches, whatever. We mentioned glitches in the first rule. Those things will drag you down. They'll cause problems. They'll make users angry. You make customers angry, etc., etc., etc. So obviously, having errors is make sure that you're doing it right. One of the key things I could see is having like a problem, and maybe if your program is rather complex. So if you're doing like a web app and there's lots of screens, or there's lots of this and there's lots of that, you could have a flow chart, and if you have an error in your flow chart where there's like no way for you to get to the settings screen from this other screen, but you need on this particular screen to get to the settings screen, that's like an error. That's like a glitch, right? So you need to make sure that is fixed and working and everything. So make sure to kind of like do user testing, do your research, do all these steps to prevent errors. Errors are going to happen, to be clear. It's not like you can prevent everything. And sometimes, like, quote unquote, an error might just be that when you released it, a bunch of these, like, maybe it's only like 10% of the population, but that's enough of the population to get upset. They want to use the product in a certain way. You didn't design it that way, but like, sometimes you have to kind of like, bite the bullet and just sort of like redesign a section for that 10%, because you did your user testing, you did everything, and you helped or you set it up for 90% of the population, but that 10% wants to change what they're doing, or like use the product in a different way, and therefore you need to kind of fix it. So errors like that are always going to happen. Little iterations like that are always going to happen. Those are kind of self-explanatory. I don't know if you had any specific examples or thoughts on that one, Mike.
I mean, like, just a quick example would be any sort of user input could cause errors. I think the big thing is that you try to minimize the fact that you're not telling the user they did an error. You're telling them that something happened. Here's how to fix it. So I think that's where this kind of goes into, like, they put in the wrong email, an email that's already registered, and you tell them that this email has already been registered. Here's what to do, like either recover your password or log in. And you can kind of do it like two different ways. You can either do it upon validation or upon input. So you input an email and it automatically validates as they leave that text box. Or you could do it upon when they actually press the button. I'm of the mind where you should do it when they leave the text box, just to catch it real quick so that they don't enter a bunch of more things and then they realize they can't use this. You want to catch it as fast as possible and get them to choose one of the options that you give them. So don't tell them that this email, the email you entered is wrong. Tell them, no, this email you entered is already registered, or this email you entered is formatted a different way. Maybe you want to format it this way. Something like that. So be very gentle with the user, I think, with this preventing errors business, and make sure to keep your experiences as simple as possible, just like one of our rules already said, to make sure the errors are minimal. But yeah, other than that, I think I'll move on to the next one, which is number 14, rule number 14, offer informative feedback. And this really refers to showing the user what's happening visually while it's happening. So for like the easiest thing I could say is a loading indicator, where something just spins or something like that. So the user knows that there's something going on in the background when nothing's going on. So nothing's going on visually for them. So you put a visual indicator when really there's nothing going on other than the fact that there's a server communication happening. And so you show that to them in some way. Either it be an actual loading bar where it actually reflects the loading, or just something that's spinning so that they know that something's happening. Any sort of animations, in my opinion, do fall into this topic. So any sort of, flying in from the right, flying in from the left shows the user that something's happening. So shows the user that the information is coming not from the page that you're on, but from maybe some other source. I like to use the fly-ins to show any sort of server content that comes in, or any sort of content that I have to fetch, because it's showing that I'm actually kind of fetching and displaying that content. Stuff like that. There's not too much I can really add to it, because I think animations really does cover this visual feedback section, and we've already had a whole topic on animation, so if you want, you can check out that podcast. It was pretty interesting, so go do that for sure. Other than that, I think we can move on to the next one, unless Matt has anything to discuss with this.
The only thing I was going to say is that I think I read an interesting, I can't remember whether it was a case study or whether it was just an article on Medium, but it was for action buttons, it was try to use verbs more than just okay. Okay is kind of it has its place, but if you notice, things on Windows used to be always cancel or okay. But it'd be well, if an error shows up, that's not okay. So now change the button to close, and that sounds like a very small change, but it's very, I would say, critical. It's a kind of a critical change in which you're guiding the user, especially in some things where instead of you just saying submit form, you're saying send email or send message, or kind of have the verb, kind of have the action there. I think that's kind of a critical thing, because that's like feedback. It's it's more of a, what would I say? It's a confirmation of what I'm doing before I do it, and I'm more confident than just pressing okay, if that makes sense. So that's just one thing. That's the first thing that kind of popped in my mind for that one. But otherwise, I think it's, again, these are starting to get more self-explanatory. But that's good. We're starting to hone in on what UX should be. So I think number 15, which is the final one, I think we can move on to that one. Number 15 is avoid dramatic redesigns. So the byline of this one is, remember, is it Weber or Weber? Anyway, sure. Weber, I'm going to say Weber. It could be Weber. I apologize. Weber's law of just noticeable differences. So our example that we thought of was, obviously, we discussed this in a previous episode, which is the Dig redesign that killed the website. So just changing things for the sake of changing things. Obviously, if you need a refresh, like we did with that industry site that needed a refresh, it started getting old. It started to functionally not work too great. But it needed a refresh, so we did it. But we didn't needlessly move buttons around. These people don't care if there's 18 transitions and the UX is really great from a case study perspective. They want to go to the services page. They want to go to the other pages on the site, and they want to know where those buttons are. They have work to do and they have to get it done. So we didn't do a dramatic redesign. We did a full refresh, and it was rather obvious, but it was also obvious that you could use the site as you did before with virtually no changes and find what you needed. So that's really critical. One of the things I think with this too is it kind of is the, I don't, what this kind of brings up in my mind is I don't like taking a half step. Reddit to me is kind of doing a half step where they have the redesign and then they're still heavily supporting, or at least there's a lot of users still using the old site, and then there's like some edit pages for mods that are in the old site, and other things for on the others, like there's edit pages that will affect both. There's edit pages that will only affect the old. There's edit pages that only affect the new, and sometimes it's unclear what does what, and it's very confusing. Like I'm even stammering trying to explain it because like it is confusing. Like it's not a good user experience. The UI is old in some places. Like in my honest opinion, it's a mess. It's like if you really believed in this redesign and you thought that it wasn't going to be such a dramatic thing as this rule says, and you thought it was going to be like a really great and needed thing, then go all in. But I think they're scared because of the whole dig thing, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it.
But in my opinion, then maybe you should have. I was going to say, like, I don't know whether you should do more user research, but maybe you should consider not doing it then. I don't know. I just don't like the foot half in. It's like, if you're going to redesign, just do it.
But again, you just do it and everyone hates you. Like Reddit is a very user-driven site, and like any user will hate a redesign. Pretty much, I mean, anytime Facebook does a major redesign, for the first couple of months is a bunch of people hating on it. But Facebook is so big and so dominant that they're not afraid. Like they know that this redesign is good. Most of the time it is actually beneficial. Like not to praise Facebook, but most of the redesign have made sense. But initially people will hate it because of this button's not where it used to be, and that's bullshit. So I mean, it's going to happen, but Reddit is more afraid because its users are very much capable of backlash.
Yeah.
Very, very intense backlash, and they don't want to anger a mass majority of those users by just, flipping a switch and causing a complete redesign, just like Dig did. I mean, they have an exact thing to look at to not do. So I think that's why they're doing it. I'll disagree with you on this one, on the fact on not doing half measures. I like this half measure that Reddit did. I'm actually getting used to the redesign, which is big from the last time we talked about it, because I wasn't very into it, but I've been using the redesign since we talked about it. I haven't had too many issues. There's still a couple things that I like in the older Reddit, but it's something I can definitely live without, and I hope that they will just implement into this newer Reddit. So, I don't know. That's my opinion.
I mean, we're always going to differ. Like I differed with you on the one management style one or whatever it was. But of course, like I think just to close this rule off, but one of the things I read, again, years ago, I read this thing where they were saying that the reason why Facebook refuses to change some of it, like, I mean, obviously they'll flip-flop on some features here and there, but when they do like a big redesign, they say it's because they've done the user research, they figured it out, and usually it's a very vocal minority. Most people will log in and be like, oh, Facebook is different, that's dumb, and then they'll keep using it, forget, and then they'll just keep using it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And they don't even realize that there's been a redesign or that there's been a change. And like, there's always these like, I don't know what the percentage would be, 10% or less or something like that, or just screaming from the rooftops. And these people are screaming usually on Facebook. So like, I mean, you're screaming on Facebook about Facebook. Are you really going to leave the platform? Probably not. And you're going to forget in like 2 months or a month or a week or whatever. So that's just, dramatic redesigns, have their place, I think. But I would say that they need to be considered very seriously as to whether it's required, I think.
Yeah.
That's my opinion on that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think we can move on to web news. This is quite a long episode, actually. I started realizing that around like Rule 10. I was like, oh, God.
Yeah, yeah, again, we kind of went into the same thing being like, oh, this episode's not going to be very long at all since we only have like one segment technically. But all of a sudden we're at the almost hour 30 mark and haven't even started web news, and it's a big web news too. So yeah, let's get right into it. Hopefully we don't carry on too long for people, but let's cover it for sure because it's an interesting one. So web news this week is labeled Microsoft, and I think a lot of people
what a label.
Yeah, what a label. I think exactly. I think a lot of people will know why we were covering Microsoft this week because it's in the news, and the latest Windows update hopefully hasn't affected any of our listeners. But if it has, let us know how you're dealing with it. But the latest Windows update has a chance to delete your user files, and as far as we know right now, there is no chance of recovery. And the user files, what we mean is all your documents and anything in your documents folder. So apparently the desktop's not affected, but stuff like the pictures and videos, if that's in your documents folder, that's affected. So all your pictures are gone, all your videos are gone. If they're not backed up, we're not sure they're recoverable. And these are the updates that most people, like I'm assuming over 90%, have turned on automatically because that's how Windows delivers them at this point. There's not automatic updates. It's a big thing with Windows 10, right? Everyone, as soon as Windows 10 came out, everyone's like, what's with these updates? Like, I'm in the middle of a meeting, all of a sudden I can't skip this update, and bam, my meeting gets delayed by an hour or however long it takes. Like, I've had a Windows update take 6 hours. I don't know what it's doing in the background. It's just doing a Windows update. It's probably reformatting my hard drive. I have no idea. But pretty much what this web news topic is going to be is our gripes with Microsoft. So we've had our gripes with Apple. And we talked a little bit of Microsoft in that one, but I think we're going to go deep into our gripes with Microsoft since we've been using it for so long, and we have quite a few of them. And this is saying from Microsoft fans, we like their services. We're going to continue to use them regardless of all these things, even though some of these you might consider to be, game breaking. If you're an Apple user and you hear this list, just know that we're very deep into the ecosystem, and we don't experience them very often, but since we've been using it for so long, we obviously have built up a pretty significant list. So I'll
basically
get right
a UX complaint list, more or less.
Yeah, exactly. Like the bad taste in your mouth kind of complaint list. So I'll just go through them and then we can kind of talk about them after. So randomly corrupted hard drives, unskippable updates, the Windows Store. I'm just gonna leave it at that. Troubleshooting steps are ridiculous, and we're going to get more into that. Microsoft Word Upload Center integration. If anyone understands it, please let me know, because I am so at a loss with Microsoft Word at this point. I can't even use it.
Yeah, here's my phone number to call me up to help me out.
Yeah, please. God. I didn't know I would need a tech support for Microsoft Word, but anyway, here we are. The hardware glitches in the Surface lineup, I've had a little bit of experience with that. I know that there's a lot of those out there. And then another one just to throw in there, tablet mode on Windows 10, touchscreen laptops or tablets. So those things, we'll go through them now, but let's just go through the randomly corrupted hard drives. I think Matt and I have both experience with this. So what happens is that this is the process. Use a laptop, turn it off for the night, go back, open the laptop, it can't boot up. Don't know why. Why can't it boot up? It's not literally, it's just crashing, blue screening or nothing. So you're like, okay, well, what's going on? So you try to go into recovery because, Windows 10 has a great recovery mode, has those recovery partitions, has those, restore points, stuff like that. Usually that works. Try to do that, doesn't work. Try to go through all the usual, check disks, all that, doesn't work. Nothing works. There's literally nothing, none of those troubleshooting steps that you would usually do to restore a corrupted hard drive work, because your master boot record has been corrupted with a Windows update. Most of these updates were unskippable up until recently. Recently, they have come back on that, and you can now kind of delay the updates indefinitely, I'm pretty sure. But I've had 2 computers now that have I've shut them down, gone to sleep, woke up, and a Windows update has corrupted it. Matt, how many computers have you had do that now?
I think twice on the same computer. So I'll explain the situation. So it's a little bit different. So I had one where I updated its hard drive, and what I had done was it was a laptop, and I literally just cloned the previous hard drive. Now the cloning software was a third-party software, and it said there was no errors, no problems, whatever. I put the hard drive in, and booting was slow and stuff, but it was a hard drive. It was slow in the old one too. I just upped the size, I think, and upped the size and upped the RPM, I think, of the drive. But anyway, I was using it. I used it for maybe 2 or 3 days, and then I went to your house because we were going to be working on some stuff, and this is well over a year ago now. And anyway, so I went to your house. And we were going to be working on some things, and I remember I tried to copy a file as I was trying to update someone's website. I was trying to put up these new documents, and I said, "Well, that's weird. It just garbled the file name." And then I saw that it was starting to try to sync a garbled file name, and OneDrive started to freak out. I said, "Oh shit! What the hell's going on here?" So I cut it out, and I moved it into the desktop. And then it started to like fill the desktop up. Like it started to just have corrupted files, like ghost files everywhere with like garbled names. So I tried to delete some stuff, and then and so it deleted. Like I went to the recycle bin, but some of them weren't deleted. Like they weren't moved into the recycle bin. But I was like, okay, I'm gonna go empty the recycle bin of what's there. I went to the recycle bin, and everything, including stuff that I deleted like days prior to this issue, were all garbled. And I was like, okay, I gotta restart. So I tried to restart it, and it just like wouldn't boot up. And on this particular laptop, they have like this recovery, like I guess it's like a bit of flash storage on there that has like the store the factory OS like ready to reinstall. And you know, I didn't go for that right away. I kept trying to do the recovery tools. Nothing was working. Like it wouldn't check disk. It wouldn't do this. It wouldn't do that. And we were under the assumption, oh, this hard drive has actually failed. It wasn't that. The hard drive's right beside me right now, and it works. It was quite literally Windows. We don't know. I don't know if it was Windows or if it was the cloning process, to be clear, but it like totally fucked up. The data was unbelievably corrupt. Like I've never seen a hard drive this corrupt. I had to like go back to Windows 8, and because that's what the laptop came with, and I was using Windows 10 at the time, to go back to Windows 8 and do the upgrade again. It was a mess. And like the only way to fix this was we even tried a USB stick with Windows 10 on it. That didn't work. We had to go back to Windows 8, completely wipe that drive clean, and then upgrade all the way through. And it took for freaking ever because it's a hard drive. Later I updated to an SSD, and I just did a fresh install of Windows 10 on that thing. But regardless, that was my experience with that. That was a nightmare. Like that was really bad. And then I had another one on that same computer after we had fixed it. So this was like before I got an SSD and after I had that problem at your house. I was at a buddy's house, and we were playing some games, and then I kind of just like left my laptop on. He left his computer on. We went to go grab some food, came back, and my computer was just had like the spinning wheels. So there's like the little dots in a circle, and had like that loading wheel spinning, and it was just stuck there with a black screen. I thought, oh, that's weird. And it was just stuck there. I tried everything. I couldn't get it to boot past that. I tried everything. So I literally just like, he had a spare computer. So I like booted into his spare computer so we could kind of get on with it. And I put this computer, or my laptop, I put that on a spare table, still plugged in, and I let it load. It took like 35 minutes and it booted up. And I was like, oh, okay. Mm-hmm. And then it just started doing that every single time I booted up. Fantastic. And people were like, "Oh, it's this driver problem. It's this. It's that. It's this." And I was like, "This is insane. Like what is going? Like this is a. Well, I mean, it's upgraded from Windows 8, but it's still a fresh Windows 10. I had no files on that Windows 8. Like, what is going on?" Mm-hmm. And it was just jank. So I mean, a fresh install on an SSD did fix it. Like an absolutely fresh install with no file backup, nothing other than the fact that I did my syncing with OneDrive. But that was a fucking disaster. Like to be blunt, that was an absolute disaster. Yeah. That was bad. And I attribute that to an update. I think that the unskippable updates, which is our next point, I think that an unskippable update came in. It tried to update my graphics driver, because people were saying that if it's a black screen with the spinning wheel, it's trying to do something with the graphics driver. Mm-hmm. And I attribute it. Then I didn't see it because it was automatic, but it just so happened to be when the computer was not active. I was away from the computer, so that's when it tries to do its updates to not interrupt you, and it just totally janked that thing. Like that thing was destroyed.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, those unskippable updates. Like, I've had countless times where they've delayed a meeting. That I'm not even going to mention those, but the one time that really sticks out was I was at a client's house just doing some like random IT work on the side for him, and I just had to quickly restart his computer to because I uninstalled some applications and I just wanted to do a fresh restart, and I was about to leave because like I was just finishing up, and all of a sudden the restart wasn't letting me restart because there was an update.
Yep.
And I didn't want to do the update because I knew like I didn't want to waste that time. Didn't want to waste my client's time. Didn't want to waste my time. And so I didn't know what to do. So I just pressed the update. I was hoping it was going to be a quick one. Well, it wasn't. It was another one of those random times when the Windows update took. I'm not even sure how long because I had to leave. I waited for an hour. No, for sure. Like I'm not sure how long. It might have been like 7 days for all I know. Like, I don't understand what was causing it. No idea. But it wasn't an SSD, and I've noticed that Windows 10 in general does not run on an SSD. I mean, when I say does not run, you don't have a good user experience.
It is unfucking. I'm gonna swear again. It is unfucking believably slow.
Yeah, like it is not. I'm gonna say it. It's not usable. If you're using Windows 10 right now with an SSD and you're doing any sort of web development work, please stop. Please, like, use that extra $100 that you've made from anything and just invest in an SSD, please. Like, I'm begging you, because it's just bad for everyone involved, including your mental sanity and including everyone in your family. The SSDs are a must, and I think Microsoft should honestly make it so that people are just like, an SSD is required to run Windows 10, because having this terrible experience will really hinder their, like, the good stuff that Windows 10 has. And we're not going to get to the good stuff here because we've kind of already talked about it enough. But there is a lot of good stuff in Windows 10, in my opinion. But you're never going to see it if you're not using an SSD, unfortunately. It's just going to be a stuttering, slow hard drive at 100% mess.
40-minute boot up time on my laptop. That's why I switched to a new RPM, and I couldn't handle it. I had to upgrade to an SSD.
Yeah, like, I mean, it's worse than 40 minutes. It's worse than using Windows 95. I'm putting it out there. Like, there's no way
it's doing too much. It's like a phone. It's checking location. It's doing this. Yeah. It's like checking location. It's running Cortana. It's checking the OneDrive. It's doing the scans. It's doing this and that and the other thing. And if you think about it, your hard drive, if it can only do one task a second, let's just hypothetically, one task a second, literally it literally gets in a queue line.
Yeah.
So if it's like open Steam, the game client Steam, open Steam, it's 100 tasks back.
Yeah.
And what if one task takes more than a second? Now it's like, it's all fucked around, and then the line gets too long, and it starts to act really poorly, and then that's just opening Steam. Then you got to sign in. It has to access the hard drive to figure out what games you're running. It has to like do all this other stuff. You're on freaking Chrome. Chrome's checking shit. Like, it is. I didn't believe Mike. I literally was like, no, I'm buying a 7200 RPM drive, and like I know.
I recommended against it. I told you not to do that multiple times. And I 100% agree with him. I literally will not use a computer with a hard drive in it now. Yeah,
it is not happening because it is.
I won't even fix a computer with a hard drive in it, let alone use it.
Well, I have a friend who likes to do Twitch streaming and stuff like that. We had a problem with OBS and he had to restart, and he's like, "I'll be back in 20 minutes." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "I'll be back in 20 minutes, maybe 30." That's what he said, like, legitimately. And he's like, "Oh yeah, that's just how long the computer takes to start up." I'm like, "What the hell is going on here?" Yeah. Like, these guys are like using these hard drives still, and like, so this, like, what I always say to people is, SSDs are the real snake oil of computers.
Yep.
It really works.
Yep. And like, I'm sure that Windows or the Microsoft team could make regular hard drives still work and still be okay. But the problem is, and I guarantee this is what happens, on initial install on a hard drive, Windows 10 works fine.
Oh yeah.
On the first week or so, maybe even less than a week, but the first couple of days or so, it's working like any other operating system. It's fine. It's a little bit slower than SSD, but it's not that noticeable. You could still use it. It's not terrible. The problem happens after about a week or so, when other stuff starts piling up in the background, when there's a bunch of like anti-malware executables running and all that, and Superfetch and a million other things running. When it starts building up on loads, everything starts to slow down. But the problem is that none of these Microsoft employees, and I'm gonna make a general assumption that not a single Microsoft employee has a regular hard drive as their main boot drive in their computer.
I'd really hope not.
Yeah, but I mean, like, it makes sense, right? Like, if you are a Microsoft employee, you're either running a Surface laptop, or you're like, you have a computer with a regular, like, with an SSD in it, because it's just like, economically, it's very affordable now. It's not like SSDs are these like luxurious items. No, they're not. They're very, very affordable. Most laptops, even sub $500 laptops, are now getting SSDs in them. So it really doesn't make sense for a Microsoft employee to run a hard drive as their main boot drive. So I'm thinking that has to be the main reason why they're not like fully addressing this issue, because they're like none of their employees are seeing it. And like they'll be like, oh, we'll test it on a hard drive. They'll load up Windows on the hard drive, click around for like a day, and then be like, oh, this is working fine.
Also, it's known too. Like if you were to bring your computer to a like a computer repair shop, they would literally just say, "Is there an SSD in there?" Like that. Yeah. That like, you know what I mean? Like that's an upgrade that you can do. You can have a slow experience if you want. It's still gonna work. Like it's still gonna run everything that you'd be able to.
Yeah.
And to be clear, like I use mechanical drives to store things because it's cheaper per megabyte, like significantly. So like I have 3 hard drives right beside me. Like you know, I edit off of them. They're fine. But this is the thing, is running Windows and then running things, whether it be a movie, a game, what the heck was that? That was weird. The driver or anything like that. Running any of that is at the same time as the OS, no go, no chance, 0% chance.
Yeah. So okay, yeah. I mean, I think that covers the unskippable updates, and I think we added one with the hard drive and versus SSD from Windows 10. But let's move on to another interesting one that Matt and I have a lot of back and forth on. And I think this will be the last one, since we're getting to a very, very significant time frame for our podcast.
Yeah, but 2 hours here.
Yeah, almost 2 hours. So troubleshooting steps are ridiculous. And what that means is, yeah, I'll just say my story. I bought Gears of War on the Windows Store, which, again, I'm not even going to talk about. I mentioned it because I'm hoping that you know. But yeah, Windows Store. I bought Microsoft Gears of War 4 on the Windows Store.
Excuse me, sir. I'm looking at the icon. It's actually the Microsoft Store.
Fine, Microsoft Store.
And it's the App Store for everyone to be clear, not the physical locations.
Yeah, it's the App Store on all the Windows 10 devices. So I bought it there. Great that they offer it. I love that they're offering Xbox games on Windows now for the most part. It runs pretty well, but all of a sudden I come back to like kind of like a Windows Update situation where I go back into the game and an error message pops up. And I'm like, okay, and it's an error message from Microsoft because it's one of their developed games and it's running from their store. And it says something, and I copy paste that error into Google, go into the first link, the Microsoft forum, where they have a Microsoft employee there and a bunch of people talking, and the Microsoft employee chimes in, and he says, to fix this, just go to the start menu, type in reset into the search, go to reset my PC, and just reset your PC, and then reinstall the game. And this was a Microsoft employee. Like, this was someone on Microsoft's official forums. A Microsoft employee said to fix a game not launching error, a Gears of War 4 not launching, to go in and reset your PC.
Yeah.
For a game not launching. The next comment down from the Microsoft employee was another person saying, just right click on the game and say verify cache. And that worked.
And that fixed it.
It was maybe a 5-minute process to verify the cache. Right, they had to re-download some files.
Yep.
They have their own, like, they have a fix built in, but their Microsoft employee literally just tells people, and this is like, Matt can attest to this, any problem you have, any problem with Microsoft, your calculator doesn't work, your Windows File Explorer stutters one time, any sort of problem you have, if you ask a Microsoft employee on the hardware forum, their first, and I mean their exact first response will be to reset your PC.
With the exception of if Microsoft has a specific tool, like Windows Update Fixer for Windows 7, for example. They'll usually give you that.
We're talking about Windows 10. Windows 7, this wasn't an issue because it wasn't as easy to... Like, they made it super easy to reset your PC and keep all your files, right? They did that for a reason.
My favorite feature, and I said this when I installed Windows 10, I said my favorite feature is the fact that I can reset my PC and walk away and it'll do it itself.
Yeah.
Like, it'll just reset itself.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds like totally ridiculous and ludicrous, but like I was having a problem last week where my one screen wasn't turning on. I couldn't figure out whether it was the driver, whether it was Windows, because it would boot up and it would post. So like the BIOS would show on both my screens. I have 2 screens, show on both my screens. And then when Windows would like boot up and get into the screen, like the lock screen where I go to sign in, it would it would like only go to my secondary monitor, and it wouldn't detect my other monitor. I'd have to like press the project screen, or I'd have to unplug the monitor and plug it back in. It was a bit kind of a mess, and I kind of got it to be more stable now.
Yeah.
But like it was just weird because it was like, well, it's working at the post, like it's just Windows interjecting, and it's just not working. And to my knowledge, there had been no update. So I don't know what happened. And my first thing I thought of was, well, actually, I shouldn't say the first. First thing I thought of was I could reinstall the driver from my GPU. And then my second thought was it might be easier for me to reset and have it do that too.
Yeah.
I
mean, hats off to them for making the reset process so easy, but come on, guys, just do a little bit. Like, just Google your own problems. Like, there's people out there that have solved them. Like this guy with the cache.
Every programming, every troubleshooting tree, or not, and I'm saying that as a blanket statement, generalization. Generally, in my opinion, every troubleshooting tree results in reset at some point, but
not the first thing.
I believe that could be the catch-all, but I agree. It shouldn't be early in the troubleshooting steps. Like unless it's something like some stuff is very like, oh, that's fucked. We need to reset.
Yes.
Some stuff is very much like that. Like, oh, I can only see half a screen, but my screen works on other operating systems. All right, yeah. we're gonna reset this. Like, yes. Fair enough. But like other things, like a game, like we gotta understand something here. Is we're in Canada and we got. I mean, I have fiber now, but that this is a brand new thing. We have generally slow, expensive internet. Mm-hmm. And for you to, reset your PC, download all the updates again, which are gigabytes in size, and then download the game, which is gigabytes in size.
Which is 100 gigs. The Gears of War 4 is 100 gigs.
On my old internet connection before this, it would have taken 100 hours. It was 1 gig an hour on average. I shouldn't say one before. We had like an interim one, but we had some problems with them. But 100 hours to download it. And that kills the internet, by the way. You start downloading, no one else can use the internet. So
you've got over 3 days of no internet access. Microsoft employee told me to do it.
I downloaded Battlefield. One of the best things on Steam was I used to just put the limiter on and then leave Steam on all the time. Yeah. Because I had unlimited data, but I just had like real slow speed, so I would just download at a pace that would not interrupt the other internet, and it would just download at all times. So I was always downloading on Steam.
Yep.
Now, admittedly, like it was serviceable for the regular thing, but again, like now if it's like download 100 gigs, I'm like, okay, it might take like an hour, it might take like 2 hours. Like I'm fine with that. I think it's 100 something symmetrical or something. I don't remember, but it's fast. Like it's good. And I could upgrade if I wanted. But, like, the thing is like, with people who have, like, cable is pretty good. Like, cable's all right. 60 meg down or something like that. Cable's pretty good. But people who have DSL, you're fucked. 100%. You're fucked. Like, there's no chance. Like, it's just like, oh, we gotta redo this? No problem. I will call you in 4 days.
Yeah.
I'll call you in 4 days, and I'll check the status, because it ain't gonna be done. But I'll just see what's going on. Like, you know what I mean? I downloaded... I play a lot of video games. It's probably obvious at this point, but I downloaded Battlefield 4 years ago on my Xbox. I had my original DSL connection. I had to keep pausing it. I had to keep downloading it in the evenings and early morning, and it would kill the internet when it was up, and it took 4 days.
Yep.
Like that was when I started realizing, like, fuck, like files are getting big. Because before it was like, oh, I got to download something. But that was like an event. Download something. Now it's done. Now it's like, oh no. Because, like, using stuff, like even playing stuff or whatever, is very little bit of bandwidth being used up, but literally pulling the file in to your house, like pulling it down from the cloud, is where and uploading is where, like, the bandwidth gets used up.
Yep.
Where it's like, okay, now my pipe is full. I can't send any more data. I can't receive any more data.
Mm-hmm.
And, kind of a shitty router doesn't help either. But that that type of situation is going to happen to people, and Reset This PC is really great for stuff like that, but like people who have metered connections are going to have problems, and now they're going to be back a few updates if they don't manually update. Like this isn't good.
Yeah, I don't agree with the first step being reset your PC. Like just do a tiny little bit of research, please. No,
just go down to that little start menu, press that settings cog, and let's get her going.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that sums up our rant on Microsoft.
I was gonna say maybe we should do Word, but I think that's gonna spark another like 30-minute conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Let's move on with it.
Well, to be clear, I'm just going to suffix this with, I use Microsoft on everything. I'm only dissing them because I want them to be better.
Yes. I am the same way. Just please be better. I still like most of their services, and most of the time they are fairly good.
Well, I would say Windows 10 is the best Windows I've used.
Yes.
As a blanket statement for everything.
Yeah.
And I have a tablet. And the tablet's not great, but I have a tablet. I have a couple of laptops, and I have my desktop, and they're all Windows. And I use Office 365 Personal, and we use Microsoft services for our email. So like for our work email, and we use OneDrive as we've discussed. So there's it's totally useful. We're not dissing you that way, but there's those things that we just discussed, and there's a few others that we're gonna skip right now. Come on, boys, let's dial it in. But I think we can conclude this episode. Quite a lengthy episode, our first UX one though. So I mean, it's gonna happen, and every episode gets longer. I don't know what's going on. We put less notes in. We're like, oh, let's cut down the notes. We're gonna talk 8.5 hours. But anyway, in conclusion, thanks for listening, and make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing on the platform of your choice. You can follow us on the socials via @HTML all the things on the Facebook and Instagram. You can find us at HTML everything on Twitter. You can search us up on Medium. You can search us up on GitHub, and as well as a bunch of other services. We're going to have a bunch of social links in the show notes. I'm also going to be putting the link to the article that we just covered where we got all those rules. That's going to be in the show notes. I think I mentioned that before. As well as our Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/HTML all the things, and you can check out the tiers there and choose which reward tier you want to sign up for if you want to support the show. Feel free to leave a comment or a review on the platform that you're listening to this on, and we are signing off.